And I know
I
because
bet.
I am one, and I have definitely wasted realtors' time. I just have. So
Now you is one.
I is one. I'm guilty. So
Well, yeah, so you just never know where an op city is going to lead. Patricia Olifaituli just did one. I think they said when she took the lead that they were looking for something around 30,000 and they ended up buying something at 300,000. So you never know.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that lead that from the other day, the people that was interested in that house, I called and left messages. I never heard back. I don't know if that's the type of an appropriate lead to follow up on.
What was that lead? Oh, the one that I gave you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was
and it was pending already. Like that day, it was already pending.
Yeah, but you should follow up with that person because they can't buy that one, but they want to buy something.
Okay, I will then.
Following up with them, and you know they might ignore you. They might, but keep trying.
Okay.
Till they tell you to go away.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to get started again. Melissa and Martin. Martin, are you there?
I'm here. I'm having problems with the camera. I can't get it to pick the right type, but I'm here.
Okay. You can see what we're doing?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Great. All right. Melissa will be back in a minute. So I'm going to tuck you guys out of the way here. I can't see you. So now you just have to pipe up if you have a question. All righty. So if we're going to pivot over here to a purchase now, let's look at transaction forms again. This is what we already have in here. And so we want to add some documents, and that is where we go to here to pick a new form. And now we're going to go and we're going to add some purchase agreement forms. Now you can either add the purchase agreements to your existing listing, or you can do a save as and name it. How my naming convention would be 123 Kachina-Smith, and the Smith is the buyer. Sometimes I can't remember the buyer's name, so I'll choose the agent's name to help me differentiate it from the listing package and the selling package, okay? And then, because sometimes you might get 2 or 3 more buyers, and it's a good thing to keep them separate. So we have the Smiths, we have the McNamara's, and then we have the, the Victor group. When we went into escrow 3 times, and so we want to have different files for each set of documents in case something ever comes up. Okay, so in the purchase group of package of documents here, you don't need this one, but you can use it if you want to. It sort of summarizes all the players and all the terms and all that stuff in one place for you. Sometimes that's nice to have. I don't bother with estimated closing costs. I get that from title. You don't need this one. Normally you don't need this one either, but sometimes you're going to have a broker that is not part of RMLS. So maybe they live in Las Cruces and they have a family member here in Albuquerque and they're helping their family member here in Albuquerque buy a house. They're not in RMLS. So that's where you would use that foreign broker. I think that also applies more so probably to commercial, because they do allow out-of-state commercial brokers to work in New Mexico if they're working with a client here, because some of these large corporations have their own in-house realtors and they work across the country. And so commercial community has realized that they need to allow for that, and that person will be working together with a local broker, for example. I think that's more likely when you'd see that one. Signature addendum, same thing as before. Compensation to broker agreement for an unlisted property. This is if you're working with a for sale by owner. I did one of these recently where my client found it in Zillow. I wasn't looking there, but they found it in Zillow, and they were representing themselves. The sellers were representing themselves. So we used this form to have me get compensated. They were happy to pay the commission to half. They just couldn't afford to pay both sides. They were actually almost upside down. Okay, which is too bad because they'd owned the house a long time. Okay, now limited service notice. That's for deals where there's a couple of brokerages in town that are basically for sale by owner, except that they'll put it in the MLS for them. So that's where limited service notice comes in. All right, when you're working with a buyer, it's a good idea to get a broker agreement, buyer broker agreement signed with them, but it's not required in our office. And before I became the broker owner, I never did this. I did it when I first started as a new agent because I thought that sounded like a good idea. But after too many issues with buyers balking at it and breaking it, and it just didn't matter. So I quit using it. Now as the broker owner, I try to do it just to set a good example. And but you can't force somebody to work with you. So if they don't want to work with you, let them go, cancel the agreement, let them go find somebody else, and move on and find another client. Okay. This is for when you're going to have dual agency in play. Broker duties is, you don't need to add broker duties. It's already part of the agreement. This is new. I haven't looked at this one yet. This is the coronavirus addendum. We're going to throw that in there just to take a quick peek at it. If you have a buyer, or if you have multiple offers and you're accepting backup offers, then this is the form you would need for that. Wire fraud notice. I always want this to go with every purchase deal. This is explaining about the scamming that's going on with wire fraud, okay? That's so important. I've had it happen on my deals. Nobody lost any money because they did the protocols to check, but it happens. I read about a family that lost almost $750,000 in California. Okay, let's see here. Broker duties. You don't normally need that, but we talked about that one in the other one. All right, purchase agreement resale. This is the one we're looking for right here, 2104. That's your purchase agreement. Okay. This is for new construction or a seller-owned lot. If you help a homeowner, I should say somebody who buys a vacant lot, hire a contractor to get the house built, you can actually get paid for that. Purchase agreement, residential, new construction on seller-owned lot. I don't know if this is the right form. Yeah. So say you have a buyer and the seller is selling land and you have the buyer who wants to build the house. That's the listing. This is what you would use. And you would actually get a commission on the sale of the construction cost of the land and the house. All righty. I haven't read that one. It hasn't come up yet, but that's what that's about. Okay. You might need this one. You do need that one, actually, I guess. These others could come up, but for now, we're going to just work on this purchase agreement. If you have a different kind of purchase agreement for farm and ranch or vacant land, use that. I don't know why the listing agreement stuff is in here in the purchase package, but there it is. Here's where you'll find your counter offers, extensions. If you need to extend the time in the deal. This is where you would, if you have a client who isn't performing. So say you're in the middle of your deal and the buyer is dragging their feet about doing the appraisal or doing the inspections. This is where you could hold their feet to the fire. Notice of failure to settle or sign, that's at the end. But there's probably another one in here to force them to do their part of the deal. I'm not sure what that one would be called here, but there's probably one in here. There was in California. I can't say that I've seen that here, but should be a form that forces them to either back out of the deal or perform. I'll have to find out what that's called or if there is one in here, but it should be in here. I don't see that. Maybe there isn't one in here. It was called a notice to perform in California. Okay. All right. So we're going to just start with that because that's plenty. We're not going to get through all of that. We're just going to do a purchase agreement. All right, so once you've got all your documents in there, see how we go click here to go find all the documents that are part of this transaction here. And that's the one we need right here. I'm going to double click on it and we're going to go take a look at it. Okay, so we've already done this one before, so we're going to skip through that. All right, offer date can be today. It usually takes about 24 hours to put together an offer, between figuring out what to offer and working out the terms with the buyers and getting your paperwork done and getting it out to them. When you're new, figure on taking a whole day to get this done in terms of, you know, just getting all these little pieces put together. Doing your research, getting the pieces together can take a day. When you're more experienced, it'll go a lot faster, okay? And I say that because the date we put in the offer today is the date that all of the other contract term paperwork is referring to. So when you see in a counter offer and it says, this counter offer pertains to purchase agreement, blah, 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 dated this date, March 25th, not the date that you actually come to terms in open escrow, okay? It's this date. All right. So here's our purchase agreement people. So we have Betty, buyer, and her husband, and whatever. And then, so there we go. So here's our two clients on both sides, the buyer and the seller. And we're going to set, the settlement date is typically 30 days out for a normal loan. If they're doing FHA, you might give it an extra week. If they're doing VA, you might give it 2 more weeks. If they're doing cash, you can get it 1 week less. A 14-day escrow is not ridiculously short, but it's pretty short. If there's any kind of inspections and things like that to do, that's a little too short. If they're buying it as is, it's an investor, they don't care, they're not going to do any inspections, they're just taking it like it is, then 2 weeks is enough time. I've done them in as little as 7 to 10 days, and that is nuts. So give yourself a couple of weeks minimum, even for a cash deal. 3 weeks is better if there's going to be some inspections on a cash deal. 1 month is normal for a loan deal, a conventional loan deal. So let's say today's the 25th. I'm anticipating it's going to take 2 days to work out the terms. I'm going to say in 1 month and 2 days is our settlement date. Don't pick a Saturday or a Sunday. Make sure that you pick a weekday. There you go. And it's actually also a good thing if you can, if you're this close to the end of the month, go ahead and make it the 30th, I guess. Here's my thinking about maybe not making it the 30th, is that if there's a delay in the closing, that pushes you into the next month. So if you make it the 28th, that makes everybody happy. There's a little wiggle room to make it to the end of the month. All right, so our offer is going to be $249,000. Okay. Now, you know, you work out with the buyer what to offer. I try to let them decide what to offer so that it's truly their decision. I don't want them to come back and say, I told them to offer $250 and they could have got it for $240, for example. So as much as possible, encourage them to make their own decision. Show them the comps, show them the range, let them decide. They should be familiar enough with the market after being on Zillow for months and months to know what to offer. Okay. Sometimes they'll say, well, what would you offer? And just try not to answer that. Okay. Moving along here, you don't have to fill this out about what they're going to put for their cash payment and their loan. So most people don't. If you're doing a VA loan at 100%, that doesn't put you in as strong a position as somebody who's putting 20% down going conventional. So people just leave this blank here. California, you're supposed to fill it out, but here they want just leave it blank. Time off market fee. This is something I haven't seen anybody using, but this is in lieu of earnest money typically. So this is a payment to the seller, a non-refundable payment to the seller for taking the house off the market to let the buyer do their inspections. If the house doesn't close, the seller gets to keep it. And some sellers would rather have that than earnest money. Earnest money should be anywhere from $500 to $1,500 in our market for most sales. If you're doing a luxury listing, then make it some more. But it's just to show good faith and that you really have some skin in the game and that you're really serious about making this offer. So let's say for this kind of a price at $249,000, that $1,000 is enough earnest money. That's a little on the low side in my opinion, but I'm used to California where they put it 3% of the purchase price, which in this case would be $7,500. Okay, they can pay it by cash check or note. I don't know why that's even there. Wire transfer or cash or check. So they can take a live check down to escrow. We don't have a trust account. So don't let them write the check to HomeSmart or to you. Have them write it to the escrow company when it's time to go to escrow. They don't have to do it ahead of time. In the old days, they would write out the check for $1,000 to HomeSmart Realty Pros and give it to you to give to me. I put it in the bank, then I had to pay the escrow company. We don't do that anymore. I want them, some companies probably still do it that way. I want them to take it directly to escrow. Sometimes the buyers say, you know what, I work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I can't possibly get down there to turn this check in. Would you do it for me? That's okay if you want to do that. Have them make the check out to escrow, not to you, and you deliver it, get a receipt, and give the client and me the receipt. Okay, you can upload it into the Smart Panel so that we have a paper trail that shows that you did what you were supposed to do and there's no funny business. Okay. So check to be delivered to escrow no later than 2 to 3 days after the date of acceptance. 2 days is tight. Sometimes 3 is more comfortable. Maybe the deal gets signed on a Saturday and you can't get there on Monday. They could get there on Tuesday. So you kind of have to play around with that a little bit, but no more than 3 days from the date of acceptance. You don't have to put it in before that. Okay. So there's some other terms in here. That's the only one that I use, but if you want to use these other ones or the parties involved want to use these other ones, that's okay too. Okay. Here's some information about the lender's terms and involvement in this. As permitted by the lender, earnest money shall be applied to the purchase price. Okay. It says if the lender prohibits the credit of any portion of the earnest money towards purchase price, which I have never ever heard of, if in that case, the money would be refunded to the buyer at closing. There you go. All right, so there's our address, our legal description, and so forth, the GRT code. This is very important here because this is what escrow is going to be going by, okay? So make sure you know what that code is and put it in there correctly. The listing agent should have given you the right code in the listing. This is for a site-built home, and I don't know what other would be, but railroad car, I don't know. All right, so these are all the things that are assumed to be included in the sale, and occasionally something isn't, like that pellet stove and the washer dryer. Now, the buyer can ask for whatever the heck they want to here. So say the buyer says, you know what, I don't have a washer dryer and I liked that set. I'm going to put that in here as being included, okay? See how they had included that it's not? I'm going to add them because I want those things. I'm the buyer now and I want those things. So they can ask for whatever they want. Everything's always negotiable, even if the seller says, you're not getting that. All right, so make sure and check all the boxes of the applicable appliances. And so there's no surprises, because what's going to happen if you forget to check the box that the buyer has asked for and the seller agrees to that and the buyer didn't get what they thought they were getting, you're going to be buying it out of your commission. I'm afraid it's either that or you're going to have a very unhappy client. So try not to make any mistakes about that. It's very important so that you don't have to buy people's appliances and equipment. Okay, so this one has a loan on it, and here's the different choices. Conventional, which is 20% down typically, but it can also be less with PMI. FHA is often for first-time home buyers, but it doesn't have to be. It's really for anybody who has a credit challenge, like say they had a foreclosure or a bankruptcy, or they are not putting any more than 3 to 3.5% down. If they're putting 3.5% down, then they can do FHA. If that's all they have, that's all they can do is FHA. But if they have 5% or more, they could do conventional. They'll still have to pay PMI, that private mortgage insurance, but they can do conventional if they have a little bit more to put down, okay? This is always the strongest. Well, cash is always the strongest, but if you're doing a loan, these are pretty much the order of how sellers prefer to deal with you, okay? So the further down this list you are, the weaker your deal is gonna be, okay? With VA loans, the seller has to pay some of the buyer's closing costs. And some sellers are like, do I have to? Yes, you have to. All right, they've lightened up on that. It used to be a lot worse, but anyway, there's still some things that the seller has to pay for the buyer. And so the seller has to look at that in their bottom line. And do the sellers a favor and have that list of things that have to be paid and could be paid from the VA lender. Okay, they should have a list for you. That will help your seller determine what counter price they're willing to accept to accommodate those things. Okay, this is that MFA program for first-time home buyers. We actually had a workshop in our office a week or two ago about this, I guess 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, where somebody from the MFA office and a local lender came in and explained how these programs work. This is basically nothing down for the buyer. Okay, buyer has made written application for a loan, or they will make application for a loan. If they have a pre-approval letter, basically they have started the process of applying for their loan. So that's the stronger way to go. And even better if they've been through underwriting and underwriting knows they can get their loan. But if they haven't and they have a pre-approval letter, that means that the lender has looked at their loan, their bank statements, their pay stubs, their 2 years or 1 year of tax returns, and verified their employment, verified their proof of funds of what they're going to pay for their down payment. And those things are all in order and ready to go. So that's what we want to work with, but that's not always what we get. I've had people tell me they have all those things in and they don't. People lie, people don't understand, they misunderstand what's needed and what the terms are. So at any rate, this is ideal if they've already been underwriting. Okay, this says that they should make their loan no later than, I would say, 2 days after acceptance. If they haven't already made application, then no more than 2 days. We want them to hop on that right away. Okay. Pre-qualification letter, that's if they don't have it already. If they have it, you can put 0. If they don't have it, then give them 3 days. If they haven't even started the process, at least 3 days to get that done. But try not to make any offers with people who haven't done anything towards their pre-qualification. I've done it, but I get burned almost every time. Okay. All right. In the event the lender determines the buyer does not qualify in the loan, this clause gets them up to 3 days before signing date to terminate the deal. Or prior to X date, midnight at 1 day, 0 days, 1 day. I like 1 day before signing date. Sometimes things happen at the very last minute that nobody anticipated and it kills the deal the day before close of escrow. I have had that happen. Not fun. Okay, it used to happen a lot when we had the foreclosure problem. All right, seller financing doesn't apply in this case, but if it did and you're using a real estate contract, mortgage deed of trust or something like that, then let me help you, because this is a tricky form to fill out. You need to really understand it and think about it carefully. We don't actually fill out the real estate contract forms for them. There is a sort of a worksheet that we help them with, but we don't do the form itself. The attorneys do it. Okay. Or cash purchase. Nice. So if there's a cash purchase, then you got to provide proof of funds. This says within a certain number of days after acceptance, but I try to include it with the offer. But sometimes you just don't have it And so 2 to 3 days right here. Okay, sometimes they just don't have it handy. They've got to download it from the internet or whatever. This says if the buyer fails to provide proof of funds, they can lose their earnest money. So we want them to get their earnest money back if they fail to do that. Okay. All right. Buyer sale and closing and funding contingency. This is if the buyers need to sell another property to buy this one. And back in the old days, there used to be what was called a bridge loan, and the lender would actually cover the old mortgage while they get ready to take on the new mortgage. They don't do that anymore. So we have this new function here called the sale and closing and funding contingency, and that's a separate form. But if that's involved, you want to check this box, go fill out that form to go with it. And that one is also a tricky form, and I will help you if you come up with one of those. I'll help you the first time or two that you do it so that we make sure and get the best possible terms for the buyer that we can. There's a lot of moving parts in that one, and so you want to make sure that it meshes together correctly with this document. Okay? All right. Buyer represents that they are under contract for sale using this form, or if they're not, it's this one. If they're not under contract yet, then you use this form instead of that form. Okay, they're slightly different. You probably shouldn't be putting offers on a property if they're not at least on the market. I did accept an offer recently, that one up on Monterey in Rio Rancho. The buyers wanted this house so bad, and we had been on the market for 5 months now, and everybody's getting anxious about this listing. So they said, we want this house. We have a house in the Northeast Heights. We think it's going to sell really quick, but we haven't even got it on the market yet. So the sellers decided to take a chance and go ahead and take the offer, contingent on them selling their other house. Well, everything worked out as they had hoped, and we did close the sale, but that was a 60-day escrow, partly to give the buyers time to find a buyer, and also because they ended up with a VA buyer that needed a 45-day close. So it was the escrow from hell in that regard. It took forever, but we did get it closed. So those are tricky deals. They can fall apart. You cannot count on them working out because they often fall apart. So this is where the buyer would put the address of the property they're trying to sell, and that they have, let's see here. All right, so here's the address of the house, 567 Apache. And it's supposed to close, let's see, this agreement. Okay, so we want the other house to close. Let's see, we said this one, I don't know, we said this will be 30-day escrow, and this is the 27th. So we want that house, we said this one's going to close on the 28th. We want that house to close on the 27th. Okay, so it needs to close by then to be able to make this one work. Okay, if it's not under contract for sale, that is not going to work. All right, so it needs to be that one in that case. If you're willing to give them a longer chain and say it'll be a 60-day escrow, like we did, then you can have them not under escrow yet, but I highly recommend you try to get a deal where they're already under escrow. If you're going to accept one of those, it's a lot more likely to get sold. All right, appraisal. Buyer does need an appraisal on a loan situation, and that's well understood and included and assumed. If it's cash, the buyer could get an appraisal, but they never do. I have never had one get a appraisal. If it's seller financed, I definitely would get one. Okay, so you choose the situation, whether it's cash, don't get one. If it's seller financed, do get one. And then you got to decide who's going to pay for it. In this market, the seller often pays for it, but really, in my view, it should be the buyer. Okay, settlement and signing date is often the same right here, and funding date If the settlement and signing happens early enough in the day, the funding can be the same day. So we're going to assume that it will be the same day right there. But sometimes these things happen in different times and dates depending on availability of the parties. Okay, and holidays and stuff like that too. All right. At time of funding date are satisfied is the typical time that the buyer gets to possess the property. If there's some other terms like the seller needs 2 weeks to move out, remember we said that about this one, to remain for up to 2 weeks after COE, close of escrow, okay? So in that case, you would check this box. And it would be fair for the seller to pay the buyer rent equal to the amount of the overhead that the buyer's going to incur, their mortgage payment and anything else that they have to pay to let the seller stay there for 2 more weeks. All right. If this is a tax deferred investor exchange property, then you want to check that box. Those are other, can be tricky deals, but usually escrow is the one that takes care of all that. We have very little to do with that. You just need to know about it. All right, assessments. So if there's in a public improvement district and there's assessments on the property, say it's an older neighborhood and the city came along and put in sewer and made everybody hook up and there's an assessment on the properties for that, then they got to find out about it. And the buyers have 3 to 5 days after the receipt from their title commitment to object to that. So if they didn't know about it, they would need to speak up about it and cancel the escrow. Okay. Okay. Examination of title, liens, and deeds. The seller is typically the one that should pay for title commitment. And this is where you have the opportunity to pick your title company. It can get overridden and usually does get overridden by the seller's side. But if you have a person you want to use, and I like Debbie Talley at Fidelity Title, National Title, but you're free to use whoever you want. And this needs to be ordered, I would say, around 5 days after the date of acceptance. And this gives the buyer some time to back out, because sometimes deals fall apart. If they're going to fall apart, it's usually in the first few days, or it can be in arguing over the ORW. So let's assume that this deal is going to go forward, and we'd say within 5 days. If it's a cash deal with a quick escrow, you want it done sooner. All right, so you can say date of acceptance, or you can say date of earnest money. That's actually a good one to choose, because if the buyer never puts their earnest money in, they're not serious, right? So if 5 days have gone by and the buyer hasn't put their earnest money in yet, but here it says that the seller has to order the title commitment, we have a very sketchy deal here. So you can make it earnest money and 3 days, for example, like that. All right. If the seller's unable, the buyer has, I would give the buyer a few days, 3 to 5 days to review the title commitment, and the seller needs a few days to resolve any problems. There could be unexpected liens that need to be researched and cleared, and always read the title report, the title commitment when it comes in, because I got surprised once when I didn't. I figured, that's their problem. I don't need to read this. I should have read it. It was a mobile home property, and the title commitment specifically said the land and the house are separate, and we're not covering the land. And it was being sold as a house and land together on one property. And that's what the listing said. And I trusted that that was what was really the deal. It wasn't, and it got messy. It took me months to clean that up and fix it. Okay, and because it was a short sale, and the bank and the seller didn't care anymore about dealing with this deal. And the other agent didn't either. He wouldn't help me, even though it was his mistake. Okay, So seller shall convey by general warranty deed. That's always the best quality of deed. When you get a foreclosure or some other special situation like a probate, you might get a different kind of deed. Okay. Loan related costs. This is always a big question for everybody. Often in our market, the seller pays the appraisal fee, but it should be paid by the buyer, I think. And for sure, the appraisal reinspection should be paid by the seller because that's usually the seller's fault that it was required. Credit report should be paid by the buyer. Loan assumption doesn't usually apply, but some loans are assumable, and in which case the buyer or the seller should pay that fee. I think it would be the buyer, but anyway, sometimes there's an origination charge. You can ask the seller to pay that for the buyer, but normally the buyer would pay it for themselves. But if you're asking for concessions from the seller and you want them to pay it, you could say money or percent. So let's say it's going to be up to 3%. I think I can do that. No, it didn't like that. I've messed it. I've upset it. There we go. Okay. So this says 3% origination charge. Usually it would be like a 1% is normal, but that we're asking the seller to help pay the buyer's loan costs here. Points buy down. Sometimes that's helpful to get the payment down to where the buyer can handle it, and the seller or the buyer can pay that. But if it's a FHA loan, it might be the seller that pays it as a concession to the buyer. Tax service fee. This can go either way. I would put it on the seller. Flood zone certification, I would put that on the buyer. It's not required quite very often, but it does come up. Closing fee, you can make this 50-50. You can make it just the buyer. You can make it just the seller. It's quite negotiable, but in our market, the seller often pays the whole thing. Pro rata data search, I'm not even sure if that applies here, but we're going to put that the seller will pay it. Legal doc preparation for each side, and special assessment search, put that on the seller. Buyer recording fees, seller recording fees. And there usually isn't anything else, but there could be escrow, I mean, there could be HOA fees. And you can put that on the buyer or the seller. All this stuff is negotiable and it's pretty fluid. Title commitment is normally paid for by the seller, as is the standard owner's policy, and the buyer usually pays their own mortgagee policy for the title. Okay. This is only applying to manufactured homes, and the buyer always pays their own prepaids. That's for prepaying 6 months of taxes, insurance, and so forth. Okay, survey is usually on the seller. Impact fees you could put on either side. Transfer fees should be on the seller. Disclosure should be on the seller. And then if there's anything else like that PID information or something, anything else that you could think of, I can't think of anything else, but sometimes stuff comes up. Surprise, something new. Okay, FERPTA. This is always confusing because there's a lot of double negatives in here. But if this house is priced at $249 and it's going to be owner occupied, so the exception applies. Okay, if it was more than 300 or if it was not going to be owner occupied, then the exception would not apply. And basically that FERPTA qualified substitute form would come into play, and that basically entitles the escrow officer to become the person to collect the tax and remit it to the government on behalf of the buyer. For some reason, this legislation was written that the buyer is responsible for the seller's taxes. Stupid. Okay, application for insurance. I recommend that the buyer apply for their insurance within 5 days after the date of acceptance to make sure they're going to be able to get insurance. I've heard of homes that are old not being able to get insurance. So they're going to have, if it's an old house, they're going to have to shop around for insurance. If it's new, they won't have any trouble. Okay, contingency deadline. give them up until, say, 21 days after acceptance. That's a pretty good window to have shopped it around and figured out who they're going to use for insurance. Survey, usually the improvement location report is adequate. Sometimes if you're doing a land deal, then maybe you would want a stake boundary survey, but most people don't have that. If it's in a floodplain, you want to know that too. Have somebody provide that report. Okay, delivery deadline. The survey or the ILR should be delivered no later than 5 days from date of acceptance, 10 days from date of acceptance, and 15 days from date of acceptance. 5, 10, and 15. Okay. All right. Lead-based paint. If it's built before 78, check this box. If it's not, you don't need to. If it's in the PID, you do that one. If it's in an HOA, you do that one. Property tax disclosure. Always give the buyer the tax disclosure at the time of the offer. That is the way the law is written as being required, unless they waive the right to receive it. So the listing site is supposed to give you that, but they don't often do it. So if they won't give it to you, you got to dig it up yourself. And that's available on the county tax website. If it has a septic system, then you got to deal with that. There's paperwork that goes with that. If it has a well, there's paperwork for that. Private, shared, irrigation, or other. Those can get sticky and difficult. So be prepared for some learning curve on this one if you have one of those. I haven't done one of these yet, but okay. Tenants occupying property after closing. So if you've got a house with tenants in it and they're going to stay, then you want to have a tenant estoppel certificate. It says will or will not, it will be provided. Especially when the tenants have been there a long time and nobody can remember the terms that they moved in on. Okay, so if the tenants need to move out when the buyer takes the house because it had tenants but now it's going to be owner occupied, then you would not check that box and you don't need a tenant estoppel certificate because you're not going to be dealing with the tenants. They're going to be gone, hopefully. If they're not gone, then you do need that. Sometimes the seller refuses to evict the tenants before close of escrow, in which case you're going to inherit them and you better get this tenant estoppel certificate. Okay, solar panels. If the house has solar panels on it, you need to know that they are or they are not leased, and if the loan and the lease can be assumed. There's a form for that, 5125, that deals with that if there's solar panels, okay? They're not that common here, but they do happen. All right, delivery deadlines. This is also one that I get a lot of questions about. Property disclosure statement. It's often included in the listing. When you go here to documents, here's the seller's disclosure and the tax estimate. This agent actually did their job and gave you the things you need. So you can click on those, view, print, download them, and include them in your offer package, or at least give them to the buyer and say that, you know, you've got them, and then you don't have to put any time frame in there. All right, this is hung up. Okay, but anyway, that's where you look for those, okay? Sometimes the ILR is in here. Sometimes there's other disclosures about the HOA or something else. So go check here before you write your offer. Okay, so if the property disclosure has already been given to you, then you can make that 0. If it's not been given to you, then give them 5 days or something to give it to you. An objection deadline, 10 days. And a resolution date, 15 days. So you probably want to say 15 days from what? Days after acceptance. And that's how you would do that, 5 days after acceptance, all the way through. Road documents. If there's a shared road for a flag lot or something like that, you want to try to get a hold of those if they exist. Water rights, same thing, well rights, lease agreements and estoppel certificates in there. Permits, if there was recent work done on the building, you might want to ask to give you permits. HOA docs, all these are pretty self-explanatory. I always give a few days to get them to me, 5 days to review them, and 5 days to resolve the problems that might come out of those disclosures. Okay, something like that. If, like I said, if they give it to you up front, then you could put 0 here. Okay. Buyers are supposed to go check out the house area before they actually make their offer. And this states in here that you have done your due diligence about the neighborhood, about Megan's law, about sex offenders or anything like that, any obnoxious businesses in the area that you know about that. And they promise that they're not going to cancel because they didn't know that there was a bar 2 doors down. Okay. All right. The seller, there's a bunch of, I'm not going to go through all this, but do read this boilerplate stuff and understand it because you might get questions about it. Here's a disclaimer about square footage. It says the buyer has to do their own due diligence about the square footage. There are still lawsuits about this despite that. But make sure that if they care about the square footage, that they do their own investigation about that and bring a tape measure. That there's no guarantee that the information in the MLS is actually correct. Okay. Availability of utilities. Typically, we put that on the seller to make sure there's utilities, but if you're doing a foreclosure, they usually won't deal with the utilities. They won't pay for it. They won't get them turned on. They won't put them in their name or anything. Sometimes they'll help a little bit on certain things, but not all of them. And sometimes they won't do anything. So without utilities, you can't do inspections. And by the way, make sure before you order your inspection that all the utilities are on. So the second question after your offer is accepted should be, are all the utilities on? Okay, so seller usually pays for that and takes care of it except in foreclosures. Okay, this is some information about who gets to pick the inspectors and who pays for the inspectors. This is different than it used to be. Okay, so buyer pays for all inspections except the following to be paid by the seller. The only one that I would put back on the seller always is termite, but even that's negotiable here. So termite, the home inspection, I've seen people put in inspecting absolutely everything, a specialist inspection for the roof and the heater and the foundations and this and that. I would start with those 2 things. If those 2 things turn up problems, then you can take it a step further. All right. You don't need to have your client spending $1,500 on inspections when really it's in good shape and that didn't need to be done. But if the home inspector says, I don't know this pool equipment isn't working and I don't know why, then yes, go get a pool inspector to figure it out. Okay. Delivery deadlines, all the documents, give them 17 days, 14 to 17 days for inspection deadlines everything to be done by 17 days and objections, or maybe we should say 14 days here and 17 days here, because even after you get all the inspections, you need a little bit of time to put your request together and work out what needs to be talked about in the next step of negotiations. And so always order your inspections as quickly as you can after you have acceptance, okay? So that you can get them all done and get the reports back to you in plenty of time to put your objections in. And the faster, the better. Everybody's happy when it's faster. Resolution.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Are you saying that you have the seller pay the inspection?
Not normally, but sometimes they will. I've been seeing a lot of negotiations back and forth about paying for those inspections.
Well, you just put it in there.
Yeah, the buyer shall pay for the following except, which should be that. So yes, I'm sorry, I did that backwards. The termite, I just was writing stuff. The termite should be paid by the seller in my view, just because that's what I'm used to from California.
Oh, okay.
But they can sometimes, sometimes ask for, the buyer will ask the seller to pay for the home inspection. So if you're representing the buyer, you might go ahead and ask for that and see if they'll do it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I understand that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if you're representing the seller, you can decide whether or not, to the bottom line, does it matter? Is it, you really need to sell it and you're willing to do anything? Or is it like, no, tell them to go to hell and get their own home inspection. I'm not paying for that. So it's very fluid, okay? But at a minimum, I think the seller should pay for termite, but sometimes they won't.
I always have with
Yeah.
my flips. Okay.
Yeah, so there you go. You can make this as tight as 10 days, but I don't think I'd make it any tighter than that for a regular sale. For an investor, maybe, because they're mobilized and they have their systems, they just, you know, boom, 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 but not for a regular buyer who, you know, has a day job and stuff like that. Okay. Sometimes the inspectors are busy and you can't get them out there either. So you got to give them time to get stuff done. Waiver of inspections, don't waive any inspections. Sometimes you do. The only time you would want to waive inspections is if the buyer really feels comfortable about it. It's new construction or something. Yes. New construction, and they say, you know, I'll just make a punch list for them. It'll be fine. That's okay. But for older construction, definitely don't waive anything. But I'm seeing, you know, in hot markets, like Melissa has been dealing with a buyer who's been trying to make offers and not getting any accepted. And if they would waive the inspections, they might be able to get something done. I don't know. That's an option that you have to strengthen your offer, especially if you have a weaker loan situation like a VA or FHA loan. Just say, I'll take it as is, and you waive all inspections. Okay. Not only if you're comfortable and confident that it's a decent house. Okay, it's 8:15. I want to try to wrap this up quicker. All right, repairs completion. This should be 3 days, minimum of 3 days before settlement signing date. 5 days is better, but sometimes it takes time to get stuff done. All right. This says here that if the deal terminates, the buyer will not send the entire home inspection over to the seller. They don't want to know. Okay. Termination and distribution. This is talking about how that's going to be handled. Please read that. Home warranty. I usually put that on the seller, but sometimes I see a lot of sellers aren't willing to pay for it. And in which case the buyer often declines it. But I would say that if you're representing the buyer, you want to be the one to choose the home warranty company and the plan. So a home warranty plan will be ordered by the buyer, paid by the seller over here. And I always just put buyer's choice, and I let the buyer do their own investigation about which home warranty company they want to work with. We have two in the office that I believe in and I recommend. There are others out there that are also probably good, but I don't have as much experience with them. So a typical home warranty is something like $680, give or take. And that's for all the appliances, the upgraded home warranty. I think that's what American Home Shields costs, or maybe it's Old Republic I'm thinking of, I can't remember. But Fidelity National Title also, I mean, National Home Warranty is now in our market, and they have a good plan, and I think it's a little less expensive. Okay, if they don't want to, if nobody wants to pay for it, then you just click the box that says declines. They always have the chance to change their mind. If they want one, just have them let you know. But anyway, there you go. That's all that can be renegotiated anywhere on the deal. All right, more disclaimers. All right, that this promises that the seller is going to keep the house in decent condition. Always plan to do a walkthrough with the buyer a few days before closing. So 2, maybe 3 days before closing, go out there and make sure that the house is in essentially the same condition as when you made the offer, and that any repairs negotiated were done. Okay. You might even need to send out the home inspector again to check if it's something like electrical that you couldn't possibly know if it's working right or not. All right. Everybody agrees to the electronic signatures. Typically on an FHA or a VA, they may not, this just is not possible. But say, for example, when somebody buys a house and they're like, well, I think I'm going to put this on my trust, but I don't know yet. I need to talk to my spouse or, you know, whatever. And they might change it from a personal name to an entity, in which case that you might put that box, okay? Or in the case of an investor who's doing a flip. Okay, more standard language here. All right, typically you need to put this one in as Exhibit A. And I think there's maybe another place somewhere else to refer to that. I can't remember. If the lead-based paint applies here, do that. If that funding and closing deal applies, do that. The buyer's sale contingency, if that's all part of that deal. Occupancy agreement is needed, you can click that one if they're doing an REC. So there's a septic, all of these could apply, but most of them do not usually apply. So this one always applies. Okay, so just read these carefully and see what might be needed. Sometimes there's an extra something or other that's not even listed here. I would give the other side about 24 hours from the date that they receive it. So here we are, it's 8 o'clock at night. We're going to try to get this done tonight and get it to the other agent by tomorrow morning. So rather than make the date tomorrow morning, I'm going to say we're going to give them until Friday at 8 a.m. Okay, so they have a full 24 hours to work on this offer. Okay, that's really about fair. Less than that is pretty tight. More than that, you run the risk of somebody else trumping your offer in that 24-hour period. But you got to be reasonable and give them a chance to respond to the offer. Now, here in New Mexico, they're pretty strict about these deadlines. Me, I just figure that's when the buyer's offer doesn't have to be accepted by the buyer. The buyer has the chance to walk away from the deal at that point, is how I view that. And if the seller accepts it after that date and the buyer has picked a different property and moved on because the seller took too long to respond, too bad. That's how I look at it, that the deal is not dead. They look at it like the deal is completely dead. I look at it as buyer can walk away if they want to. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be able to change the entire mindset in New Mexico about that, but that's how I look at it. So, you know, there are going to be sticklers here about making sure that those deadlines are adhered to, and that if it expires, so say the seller, you know, was at the doctor's all day with COVID and they couldn't get to the paperwork in time and they missed it by an hour, they actually will make you rewrite, you know, your extensions and stuff like that here sometimes, which I think is kind of silly. Everybody wants to agree, then we come to terms and we agree and we move forward. That's how I look at it. Okay. There is another form separate from this about the wire fraud, but here's another warning. Make sure that they know about that. Okay. The agents do not sign this agreement, only the parties involved. Make sure if you're the seller's agent that you pick the correct box here. If the seller is going to accept this offer as is, they can sign here. If they're not, they need to pick one of these other boxes. Usually it's this one here with the counter offer form. Okay. So then you work on the counter offer and you put them together, and that's the offer. Okay. Any questions on all that? I went through it pretty fast. Are you all still awake?
Yes.
I was scared I could only see me there. I thought they all left. I'm talking to myself.
May I add barely?
Okay. So I know that when you get your first deal, I'm going to have to walk through every bit of this again with you, and that's okay. I'd like you to go back and read these forms, maybe even print something out and handwrite a cheat sheet of how to fill this form out, of typical dates and boxes and numbers that you would need on a typical deal. As soon as you get that done, you're going to get the next 10 deals are not typical, but at any rate, maybe you'll have a start if you have had some chance to read this and fill one out by hand or in the computer, I don't care, to try on your own before you get in the position of having to fill this out with a buyer, okay? I was up until 11 o'clock the other night with Haley because she hadn't done any prep work to learn anything about these documents. So I would really like it if you would do that. take some time to read these forms. And that way, when they come up in real life, you'll have a little bit more familiarity and it'll be a little bit easier to put your first deal together, okay? Once you get the hang of this, you can get one of these offers put together in 15 to 20 minutes. But the first time is going to be a couple of hours as you read through things and try to understand what you're supposed to do, okay? So in that case, you don't want to be doing that in front of a buyer or a seller. You want to work on it and then, you know, have me review it before you even take it to them so that you don't look like a dummy because you did it all wrong. So let me review things before you send them out to the other agent or to your client to make sure that you've done a good job of putting your package of paperwork together, to have all the forms that you need together and that things are filled out well, okay? That's what I'm here for. That's what our mentorship program is all about. Okay, but you do need to read these documents. Any questions?
Camille, I have a question on the submission of the earnest money to escrow, or if we put on there to be determined, do we have to fill out another form once that company is determined, or we're just fine moving forward?
No, just move forward.
Okay.
And let the buyer get it there. The earnest money receipt will explain how it was done.
Okay.
Don't let them go to the escrow office with cash. Somebody else I was working with, the buyers pulled all their money out of the cash, out of the bank in cash, because that's what it said, cash in the deal. They thought, oh, cash. They were going to go to escrow and pay cash. Well, escrow does not want cash. They want a paper trail so that they can show that they accepted a certain amount of money and it went a certain place. You can't do that with cash. So make sure they know that they can't take cash. They can take a money order. They can take a cashier's check. They can take a regular regular check.
Makes sense, yep.
Yeah, they can't take money, real cash. I had one guy who was buying a house with me, and the earnest money was, I can't remember, $3,000 or something like that. And he brought me 10 $300 money orders. Because that was the limit. That's all he could do. At the post office or whatever where he bought them.
He got it.
Yeah, that was a weird one. That was a weird one all the way through. And I found out later, these people, this was hilarious when I found this out. A few months later, another agent in my office said, you know that house you sold over on that street? I live a couple blocks from there, and you'll never believe what happened there. 2 nights ago, the police raided the house at 2 o'clock in the morning, pulled out all of these marijuana plants, pulled out all this equipment, and arrested whoever was there at the house in the middle of the night. I was like, oh my God. That was 2 months after I sold it. So they had turned this house into a growing house, and they had completely turned the whole house into a marijuana farm.
Wow. Wow.
It was weird. I don't know how that ended up. I didn't call the clients and ask them how's things going there.
You didn't call them and ask them if they wanted to sell the house?
I wanted to, but I was scared to. I was like, I don't want anything to do with you people. I'm scared. You're gonna get me in trouble.
Right.
So, yeah. Any questions? Okay, homework. Let's talk about homework. Oh, we didn't get to do Instanet, so we'll do that next time. I'm going to put that on here. We actually kind of covered most of what was going in session 5, but we'll put PDFs in the next one when we get to do some Authentisign stuff and go through how that works. So there's online webinars in Authentisign and Instanet. So if you go in, I'm in the broker dashboard. I'm going to go to the Camille dashboard. Right here where it says the little question mark, there is online training, live support, and guides and help videos and webinar videos. Okay, so these will help you tremendously in learning how to deal with this website. And it talks about the Instanet and the documents. Now, it's not going to go through the documents to show you what to fill into the documents like I did with you tonight, but it's going to show you how to deal with this website, okay? Which will make your job faster and less frustrating if you'll do that, okay? So do that. Let's see, I have some notes in there about what to look for, so check your notes. And that's all we have time for tonight. We went extra long tonight, sorry about that. So I'll make a note that we didn't get to Authentisign tonight. We'll do it next time. Okay?
Sounds good.
I'm about to fall asleep and I'm the one talking. Okay, you guys, good class.
Thank you.
Bye, Camille. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
All right.
Stay safe. Act like everybody and everything has germs on it.
Yes.
Stay safe. Okay.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.